Hi friends, Simit here from InformedTrades.com. Joining me today is Jeff Berwick from vigilante.com. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks.
Just jumping right into things, before we talk about vigilante.com and all the things you guys are doing there, as well as the economy. If you could just sort of talk about, a little bit about your background, how you sort of got into financial services, financial markets, just to give people an idea where you're coming from.
Sure. I started out living in Canada when I was younger, and I was a computer nerd. I was always a computer nerd from the age of about 11. And I actually got a little bit bored of my computer at some point by about 1992, because by then there still was no internet, and I'd been waiting for them to connect all the computers together. So I actually had put my computer in my closet, and I decided, okay, that's enough of that. I'm going to move on to something else. And I went and I worked at a bank, and I actually wanted to become a stockbroker. So I began studying to become a stockbroker and taking all the securities courses and all the government stuff you have to do. But right as I was about to become a stockbroker, the internet came out. So someone came up to me and they said, "Hey, have you heard about this internet?" And I said, "No, what is it?" And they told me, and I said, "Well, I've been waiting my whole life for this, so I got to get on there." So what I did was I thought I have to do something on the internet. So I thought about what I was interested in at the time, which was stocks. So I started a financial website in Canada called Stockhouse.com, and it's still the largest financial website in Canada. At the peak of the tech bubble, it was actually worth $250 million, but then a few years later, it really was worth hardly anything. So that actually is what set me off into studying economics and things like that, and I eventually discovered Austrian economics, which explained how those bubbles happen, how the tech bubble happened, how the housing bubble happened. And that led me on a long road for about 10 years of just self-study, traveling the world and trying to figure things out. And that's when I started the Dollar Vigilante. It was after the 2008 financial crisis, because I had predicted that was going to happen. So that gave me some confidence that what I knew, what I'd been learning was correct. And so I just began writing about it because I wanted people to become more aware about what's really going on in the world, and including in the economy as well as in the world in general.
So, you've been, or the gold bull market, gold and silver, has been going on since, about 2001, somewhere around there. Started at 250. When did you sort of get in? Was that sort of after the internet bubble? So I'm assuming like 2003, 2004, or when did you really start accumulating gold and knowing, what, this is where I want to be, at least for now?
Yeah, I didn't time it perfectly because I was still wrapped up in the tech bubble. So I didn't actually sell my company until about 2002, almost 2003. And that's when I started really researching things, and that's when I found Austrian economics. And pretty quickly I realized that gold and silver was going to be a good investment for the near future and for probably a long time. And I began probably buying gold and also gold stocks around 2004. So I missed the first nice bump, and I got on the second one. Unfortunately, I got caught a little bit offside on that financial crisis, because while I did predict it, I wasn't expecting the junior gold stocks to go down 95% at that time. Especially at gold was up, so it was still around $1,000 or something, which was a high level at that point, and these gold stocks were basically worthless. So I wasn't predicting that. But even still today, if you look at the gold stocks vis-a-vis gold, they're trading at the same level versus gold as when gold was around $300 an ounce. So I really think these gold stocks are screaming buy right now.
Now, on your blog, dollarvigilante.com, or it's more than a blog, it's the whole website with a bunch of services, but you've talked a lot about how the monetary system is ending, or you referred to it as the end of the monetary system as we know it. So is your outlook that this is the end of the dollar, that we're gonna go into hyperinflation? Is that sort of where you're coming from?
That's the general outlook, yes. Now, we have no way of knowing exactly what's going to happen, because a lot of it depends on what a lot of people like Ben Bernanke and Barack Obama and people like that do. If they actually wanted to, they could ensure there is no hyperinflation today. They could default on all their debt. They could bring the government back down by about 90%, be only about 10% of its current size. They could do things like that, and they could pretty much save the dollar right now if they wanted to. Every year that they don't, they're making it so it's pretty much impossible to do. Plus, politicians don't really like to do the hard thing anyway. That would be the hard thing. Obviously, you can imagine what would happen if Barack Obama walked up and said, "Sorry, everybody, I was wrong. There's no hope. There's no change. There's no welfare checks tomorrow. There's no socialist insecurity checks tomorrow." You can imagine what would happen in the U.S. right now with almost over 50% of the people dependent on the government at this point, and 1 in 5 people on food stamps. So it's really difficult for them, and in history, almost all politicians always choose the same way out, and they choose to inflate rather than to deal with their debt problems, because they can blame the inflation on other things. So they can also make it last a little while longer by doing that. So the U.S. could make the dollar last maybe 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. I think that's about the max, though, by inflating. But I think things will just get more and more out of control. But they have to do these sort of things just to stay alive at this point in time. But like I said, it's easier for them to do because they can blame the inflation on other people. They can say, "Oh, it's the Chinese," or it's those greedy corporations or capitalists. So they almost always in history have always chosen hyperinflation. And so yeah, I think that's the direction it's going. It's obvious with Ben Bernanke saying he's going to do QE to infinity now, that pretty much is baked in the cake, that we're going to have hyperinflation. If you look in the UK, there was just an article just yesterday in one of the UK newspapers saying, and this is a serious economist saying, that he really thinks they actually have to bring out helicopters and start dropping money. These are the ideas that Keynesians have. Keynesians are highly deluded, incredibly sick individuals, and for whatever reason, they cannot learn from history.
Well, what about the idea, or in this, and I'm sure you've probably seen this online as well, and a lot of the people debating about inflation versus deflation is sort of a common debate, even amongst those who have accepted Austrian economics. So there's sort of, or one view, is the hyperinflation view, or rampant inflation, the Fed can engineer it, that view. The other view is that, the majority of monetary money supply expansion occurs through the commercial banking system, giving out loans. If banks aren't giving out loans because there's no credit-worthy borrowers, and borrowers just are scared and they want to pay off their loans, then the Fed is not omnipotent and is not going to be able to engineer, inflation. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm part of an Austrian economics group, a Yahoo group, and a lot of us get together. A lot of names you've probably heard of. It's a lot of fairly big names on there. And still to this day, we still argue about inflation, deflation, and we're all sort of on the same side as Austrians. We see the government as being a problem in the economy and never a solution. And so it's amazing that we're still having these debates. But I still am quite firmly on the inflation side, and there's a number of reasons for that. And you brought up a reason why people believe there could be deflation is because they say that the Federal Reserve can't keep up. The commercial banks have to loan out more money in order for there to be hyperinflation. Well, I think you just have to look at the last few years to see that's not the case. The Federal Reserve has said they'll do whatever it takes to make sure that there never is deflation. Ben Bernanke wrote his whole thesis on making sure there never is deflation. They can print up as much money as they want. A lot of people who think that there's no way that they can do that are kind of stuck in the past, because there used to be things called bank reserves, and they used to have a certain limit of the amount of loans they could do and things like that. Well, that doesn't even exist anymore. There is no reserves that they need to do loans. The amount of reserves hasn't changed in the last 10 years, while the amount of assets of the banks have gone up tremendously. But even if the banks don't want to lend, the Federal Reserve can print up as much money as it wants. It's really unbelievable right now that the Federal Reserve has been the biggest buyer of treasuries last year, by far the biggest buyer. They're now the biggest owner of treasuries. So that right there is evidence that they can do whatever they want. If they want to buy up an entire market of something with Federal Reserve notes, they can. Now, of course, this is going to lead to hyperinflation, but they don't seem to understand that. For whatever reason, these Keynesians never seem to see that they're the cause of the inflation. The central bankers never seem to see that. There was a Brazilian central bank went on strike last month, and they were angry. They were striking because their wages aren't keeping up with inflation. These are people who work at the central bank. It's unbelievable. They just have no clue that they're the cause of inflation, and they have no idea. If you look back at Weimar Republic, even after the Weimar currency had gone up by 100,000-fold in terms of money supply, there was still top-level economists saying the biggest problem is there's not enough money in the system. They're one-trick ponies. They think that all there is to do is to print money, and they seem to have no ability to look back in history and see how every single destruction of every currency was based on money printing. They always think it's some sort of a I don't even know what they call it, aggregate demand problem or something. They have all these crazy theories that make no sense. And then when their theories make no sense, they blame it on things like animal spirits. You know, they're completely insane people. But this is the kind of world that we live in, and the monetary system is all run by people who go to Harvard and Yale and study these things for 4 or 8 years, and they're true believers. And it's almost like living with brainwashed people, and that's really what they are. But that's the kind of world we live in. So I think we're definitely headed for hyperinflation and the destruction of all the fiat currencies.
So, you know, right there, or you outline the case for how the Fed can, you know, force an expansion of the money supply, even if there's no commercial lending. So one other argument, and this argument isn't really advanced by deflationists, but just the people who say that there's going to be moderate inflation for, you know, decades, is that the United States is a little bit different because it's such a big economy. It's a reserve economy in a sense. So there's nowhere else to go. And these people or this viewpoint is rejecting comparisons to Argentina, saying, you know, like for instance, the renminbi is pegged to the dollar, so and there's treasury bonds are sort of a global asset. What do you think of that? You know, earlier you mentioned that you thought, you know, 5 years was sort of an upper time limit on the dollar. What would you say to the people that say, you know, we can't really run from the dollar? It's the whole thing.
Yeah, I think you have to look back to 1971. That's really when everything changed, when Nixon took the gold backing off the dollar because they couldn't afford to pay their obligations in gold anymore. Ever since then, the entire world's been on a fiat currency system, and we actually had the system almost collapse in the 1970s, in like 1979, 1980, but there was only one reason that it didn't fully collapse at that point, and that was because all the governments, all these socialist, fascist, democratic nation states hadn't yet built up massive amounts of debt because they couldn't, because they used to be restricted by gold. So they'd only had about 8 or 9 years to build up debt at that point. And at that point, the total debt of the U.S. government was about $900 billion, so not even $1 trillion. We're now at $16 trillion. So it's gone up 16-fold since then. When Paul Volcker allowed the interest rate to rise to its natural market level, which turned out to be around 18%, that could be still handled within the system because there wasn't enough debt yet. Now, it would only take an interest rate of about 11% for the entire tax theft revenue of the U.S. government to be totally used up just in interest payments alone, because there's so much debt. With $16 trillion, in the next few years, it's going to be $20 trillion. We're going up by more than over $1 trillion a year right now. So there's no way they can allow the interest rates to rise. Soon, an interest rate of even 5% will bankrupt the U.S. government because all their tax theft revenue will go just to pay for interest. So they have no real way out this time. There's no way, and there's so much debt, $16 trillion, but there's also about $70 trillion in debt and liabilities, unfunded liabilities, things like socialist insecurity and Medicaid and all those sort of things. And that actually works out, if you add it all up, to about $250,000 per person in the U.S. So that's about $1 million per family of 4 of money that's already been spent by the federal government on all their programs and all the things that they do. So this is a pretty lost cause. Anyone who thinks that they're going to get out of this just by doing slow inflation for the next few years, we're already into high inflation. If you look at the actual true money supply increases, it's still about 13% per year. Now, a lot of the reason the CPI hasn't gone up too much is mostly because the CPI is all lies, but it's also because there's been a lot of productivity thanks to the internet, but they've been destroying this productivity by printing money. So they say, well, look, things aren't going up at 15 or 20% per year right now, but they actually are. They just the productivity has helped out, but all that productivity is slowing down now thanks to government regulation and taxes. This thing is going one direction, in my opinion, and it's going to go down. It's going to go down fairly fast from here.
Okay, so just to recap or to summarize, it seems like your viewpoint is accelerating inflation, you know, reaching a point, and probably at some point, once it becomes obvious that this is going on, people will run out of the dollar. One could argue that a run out of the dollar is already underway, with people like yourself, and I'm heavily into gold as well. So that idea is becoming more common, as is evidenced by the gold price. $1,800. Someone must be buying it. So what? When we're at that point, 5 years from now, or however, 3, 4, 5, and there's really rampant inflation, what are some of the, what do you think it's going to be like? Is it going to be Mad Max scenario where it's just like a complete breakdown, chaos, violence, or what are some thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's really no way to know. The Mad Max scenario is an interesting one. The thought of Mel Gibson running around the countryside molesting people, but he's already doing that in Malibu. But yeah, I guess you mean on a bigger level. Yeah, there's really no way to know, but I do caution people who live in the U.S. I think the U.S. is going to be the epicenter of this collapse. I think Europe's probably going to go first. So if you're in Europe, I advise you to think about going somewhere else for a while. You can already see they actually don't put a lot of that stuff on the news of what's really going on. It's riots and protests, and things are on fire everywhere over there at the moment, and it's going to get worse. When it comes to the U.S., which I think will happen after Europe and maybe after Japan as well in the next few years, so many people in the U.S. are so bought into the system. Like, if you look back at the Soviet Union, not many people actually believed in the system at the end. They used to have a thing called, there was 2 newspapers back then. There was Pravda and there was Vestia. One meant the news and one meant the truth. And almost everyone would say there's no news in the truth and there's no truth in the news. But if you talk to people in the U.S., they really believe what they see on Fox News or CNN or CNBC. They don't see that a lot of it's propaganda. So these people have really bought into the system. They really believe that the U.S. is special, that it's the best country on earth, it's the richest country on earth, and that it always will be. So when this collapse happens, they're going to be in shock. And many of these people are on mostly on government systems now. Over half the population has received some sort of government benefits. A lot of people, more than 20 or 30%, I believe, are on things like antidepressants, all kinds of really dangerous chemicals that, once they can get access to those as well, they're going to go really insane. So, yeah, I really wouldn't want to be in a population center in the U.S. for the next few years. I really predict there's going to be some things that are going to shock some people. It's going to be quite insane. I think a lot of these zombie movies are really coming out just sort of predicting the future a little bit. There's so many people that have been zombified through all of the things that's going on in the U.S., including the fluoridation in the water and like I said, so many people on chemicals, they've really been pushing these chemicals like Adderall or Prozac or any of these things. These are very, very dangerous things. And the reason most people are depressed is because they live in a system where they are mostly slaves at this point. The income tax and all the taxes and all the regulations, you can hardly do anything and you can hardly keep any of your money at the end of the day. So the U.S. people are very enslaved at this point in time. And once the system starts to collapse, I think it's going to get really bad. And so, yeah, I advise people, and that's one of the things we do here at the Dollar Vigilante, is help people get foreign passports and how to expatriate. I think there's a lot of potential great things in the near future in places like Asia and Latin America. I think those are the growth areas for the next few years for sure. I think being in the U.S. or Europe for the next few years is a very dangerous thing to do.
Do you, another idea that sort of is kicked around when people discuss, hyperinflation, end of the monetary system, end of the dollar-based system, is the idea that of world government with SDRs as a global currency, the IMF taking a greater role, the United Nations taking a greater role. Is that a view you subscribe to, or what do you think of that?
I never like to talk too much about things I don't see too much with my own eyes. So I've never really seen all these world-controlling people all in the same room. I've never heard what they had to say, but there is a lot of evidence of what they've been doing, things like the Bilderbergers and CFR. So these people are definitely getting together and talking about things, and you can see how they're trying to really bring in the United Nations into so many things. Now the UN seems to be getting involved in almost everything. I just saw they just said they're going to try to arbitrate a dispute between Apple and Samsung. Like, what is the UN doing? Like, they're just really trying to push themselves into every facet of life. So you also look at things like the European Union. That was sort of a move towards a one world government that pretty much put all the European states all under one government. And now look what's happened. It's all collapsed, which is all predictable. Most Austrians predicted this. And so now what are they saying? Well, now we need to create a more one government in the EU and put it all in Brussels there. And and really control everything, because things are falling apart all over the place. So we have to go more to one government. I don't know if they'll actually get it done. I don't know if it'll actually happen. I know that it seems like some people are definitely pushing for things in that direction. But I don't comment too much on it because I don't know enough firsthand experience with it. I can only comment on what I see are actually happening in the world and what I actually can see with my own eyes. And it definitely looks like that could be the case. Commenting on one other thing, a lot of people talk about the Amero. I don't know if that's going to happen. And I think a lot of their plans, if they had plans to do things like that, they're all somewhat falling apart thanks to the internet, because as soon as some people caught on that there might be announcing Amero, which would be a currency between Mexico, Canada, and the US, a lot of people got very angry and upset. So I think thanks to the internet, if anyone does want to create this one world government, it's not going to be easy for them. And I think that's why they're trying to shut down the internet now.
What about the idea of special drawing rights? There's been some talk and some signs of China trying to internationalize the renminbi. Making it possible for other countries to denominate loans in renminbi, and there at least people are talking and saying, and even the official authorities saying that a higher value renminbi makes it possible to incorporate into the SDR. Do you think the you said the Amero wasn't something that you were seeing signs of, or maybe just a rumor, or being squashed thanks to greater awareness through the internet? What about the SDR? Do you have any thoughts on that?
The SDRs have actually been around for a few decades, and they really have never gotten any traction. Even today, there's not much traction for them, so I'm not too worried about SDRs. I really think that the best case scenario is that we have this fiat currency collapse and then we move to free market money, which would be things like gold or gold money or even Bitcoin. Any sort of free market money would be much better. All of these government monies that can be inflated by centrally planned central banks are terrible. All they do is impoverish people, and all they do is funnel money to the rich from the poor. That's basically their plan, and that's what they're set up to do, and that's what they've been doing. So hopefully we don't get there. I don't think we will unless they can shut down the internet. I can't see anyone saying they'd want to use an SDR. I think the internet will hopefully come up with all kinds of things for us to use. I could see PayPal becoming its own currency. It could just say, okay, well, all PayPal, all the currencies just collapsed. We're still here. Everything that was in your account, we'll just call those PayPal dollars now, and we'll just move on, and we'll never create another PayPal dollar from this point. Things like that. There's all kinds of free market ways to create new currencies, but it's going to be difficult. This is definitely going to be, in my opinion, the biggest thing that's ever happened in human history. Because we've had in numerous countries, we've had currency collapses. But for example, if you're in Zimbabwe, you could always buy South African rands, or you could buy US dollars. Now with all the currencies probably collapsing, it's going to be difficult. But you did bring up one other point, and that is also a possibility, is the Chinese and the Russians, they're all buying a lot of gold right now. They could be looking at backing their currencies by gold. It would only take one country to really back their currency by gold, and they would receive a huge influx of capital. Now, of course, the U.S. would probably attack them the next day, but these are the kind of things that are going on right now. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting for sure. These are definitely not boring times.
So it seems like, or at least what I'm gathering from our conversation thus far is, on one hand, you've got, or from your perspective, you've got a population that's really sort of zombied out, through the diet or the media they're consuming, and might not really be aware of what's going on, or concerned, or even energized or alive enough to really participate. But on the other side, you have the internet, which is really spreading a lot of information and allowing organizations like yours to really blossom, thrive, find like-minded people. So it's sort of like a warring faction, or those are the two dichotomies. Related to that, Doug Casey, whom I know you followed, you've learned a lot from. I'm a big fan of Doug Casey, subscriber to Casey Research. He's sort of put out the idea that the nation-state system is ending, and we're going to move towards files or a tribal type system. What do you think of? I mean, do you think the nation-state system is ending? And it's nation-state system ending. Are we going to world government? Are we going to files, or some type of weird combination? Something else? Is the nation-state system ending at all? What do you think about those types of ideas?
Yeah, it's very interesting ideas. I really don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully we don't go to one world government. That would be the worst case scenario. The best case scenario would be that we actually end up with more government, 7 billion governments. That would be the best case scenario, where everyone runs their own lives. But if the world's not quite ready for that, then the next best thing is still more government. So instead of having 200 countries, maybe there's 1,000 countries, or maybe there's 10,000 countries, or maybe every city is its own country. Which is better and better, because the bigger the government gets, the worse it is. The more it's closer to home, for example, a family you could call a government. Families work quite well. As soon as you start to get a little bit outside of a family, things can get out of control, because certain people are kind of sociopathic, and they'll always try to get the power, and they'll always try to control others. And if they don't know anyone, and if you don't know them, it becomes very easy for them to control you and to do things that you don't know about. So yes, I believe that's the future. Hopefully, is more government, and eventually 7 billion governments would be the perfect case scenario. And you know, I always say I have a motto: if you don't succeed, try again. Not succeed, but succeed. And you know, many people are talking about it right now. You talk to a lot of Texans; they're talking about it. You talk to people in Canada and in Quebec. You talk to Native Americans; they want to do it. A lot of people want to do it, but it's pretty dangerous, because most of these governments will come in and kill everybody if you try to leave their little mafia that they have there. But the more that these nation states collapse, and they're all in a state of collapse, almost all the Western nation states are in a state of collapse. They have too much debt. They don't have any growth anymore. In fact, they're dying. Their economies are all dying because of all the regulations and taxes. And all they're doing now is increasing taxes, as you can see. France is talking. They just did a 75% top tax rate, and they're talking about 100% top tax rate. So we're reaching sort of the end of these systems right now. And as they collapse, it's going to be chaotic. It's going to be fairly scary for a lot of people, especially depending on where you live, and if you're not prepared for it. So if you don't own any hard assets, gold or silver, if you don't have some money outside of your own country where your own government can't take it, because that's what's going to happen more and more. They'll start to take pensions. They've already started to do that in many countries. They did in Hungary. They did in Ireland. They took some people's pensions. They said, sorry, we're broke. We're going to need these funds now. So the governments, they're basically a dying organism. So as they collapse, they're going to try and take more and more of your stuff. So it's really important nowadays, when you're thinking about protecting your assets, to think globally and not just within your own country. Try to get a significant portion of your assets outside the control of your own government. You know, we talk about many places to put them. There's a lot of better places, including places like a lot of places in Asia, like Singapore or Hong Kong, or in Switzerland is still pretty good, although they're becoming less private. But I always say private's dead anyway. The real goal here is privacy's dead. The real goal is just to get your assets outside of the control of your own government, and even get a second passport and renounce your first passport. If I was an American right now, I'd be running to renounce my passport because of all the things they're doing. The U.S. people are some of the most enslaved people on earth right now. As an American, you can hardly open a bank account internationally. You can't open a brokerage account internationally. This is because the U.S. government is telling all the countries on earth, if you accept our people and you accept their money, that we'll come after you. So most people aren't accepting it anymore. So the last chance for people to get out before there's serious capital controls in the U.S., in my opinion, is to get a second passport, and that's something we do at TDVpassports.com.
In terms of in terms of protecting yourself, or going along with that topic, gold is obviously a very common idea, or at least people who are embracing what you're saying. Gold is sort of, that's step one, so to speak, or a very early step at least. What are your thoughts on silver, gold versus silver? How do you personally view the difference between the two?
Well, I'll tell you what I own in gold and silver, and you can take it from that. I own about 80% of my precious metals in gold and about 20% in silver. I really don't have any strong opinion. There's so many ways to look at it. You can look at, I know a lot of people talk about the old ratio of 60 to 1 or whatever it used to be of silver, or 15 to 1, sorry, of gold to silver. Now it's closer to 60 to 1. People say that, but a lot of things have changed. Things are always changing. Silver is used mostly as an industrial metal still, and not so much as a precious metal. However, it still is used as a precious metal. Really, my main opinion on both of them is why not own both and see what happens. Silver could really outperform gold. I could easily see silver hit $200 an ounce, whereas gold hitting $6,000 an ounce seems a little bit harder for me to envision based on the supply and demand and things like that. So I just look at anything hard assets, even owning foreign real estate. Anything that Ben Bernanke can't print, in my opinion, is a good thing to own at this point in time, because he's going to be destroying anything that's paper over the next few years, including stocks and shares. And on that point, I do own a lot of gold stocks, and I'm predicting that we still have a few years left in the system, and I'll have time to sell them and get out. But people should know that they should register those stocks in their own name, because most people don't know in a brokerage account that the brokerage will almost always register the account in something called street form, and they do that because it's easier and it's quicker and it's faster and cheaper. But if the brokerage goes under, like MF Global did, or if they go bankrupt, or if they even just steal your money, which is going to happen more and more over the next few years, I think, then those shares are actually deemed to be their shares. So you have to register them in your own name, and we actually wrote a report on that called Bulletproof Shares, which you can see at tdv.bulletproofshares.com. It's a $45 report on how to register your shares. So all the shares that I have, that I own, I have registered in my own name, and that way, hopefully, I won't lose them if anything too crazy goes on. And I own a lot of gold and silver stocks, so I'm pretty agnostic on it. I listen to a lot of people who say a lot of very interesting things, and I think they're all very interesting. But I just say just own both. I think either one could do very well, or both could do very well, and I don't see much downside either.
In terms of the shares, I think I read on your site, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you read, or I read that you don't hold mining companies, shares of mining companies that are listed on U.S. exchanges, or if they're listed on multiple exchanges, you'll buy the non-U.S. exchange. What about Canada, or what exchanges do you favor?
I actually never said that, so I don't know.
Sorry.
But I do favor the Canadian exchanges, mostly because I know the exchanges very well, and also most of these mining companies, that's where they're all based. Vancouver is the epicenter of junior mining for the most part. Canada is a little bit safer than the U.S. in terms of banking collapse or currency collapse, although I think the Canadian dollar will go down with the U.S. dollar when it all happens. But I think it's a little bit safer up there. So, but I really don't care. I think you could own stock. I own some stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. I think we still have a few years left, although I don't have more than about 20% of my total portfolio in mining stocks or any stocks, because there is a risk they could all pretty much go to zero in the next few years if we have a complete all-out collapse of the financial system.
In terms of the mining stocks, talking a little bit about them, do you have a bias towards, producers, explorers? What do you think about that difference there?
Lately, the producers have definitely been outperforming the explorers by far. I think what's happening is, as you said earlier, that more people are waking up that they should be in gold, and as they start to wake up to that, they start thinking, oh, maybe I should be in gold stocks. I can get more leverage. Theoretically, there hasn't been leverage on them for about 7 years, but that's theoretically the way it should be, and so they start with the majors, and we're starting to see that now. We're starting to see some of the majors starting to go up, and then I think they look at the next level. They look at the more smaller companies that are producing, and then of course the last one they'll look at is explorers. So right now I'm mostly in producers. I have some explorers. I haven't seen the explorers looking like they're going to take off just yet, although when they do, many of those stocks will go from 2 cents to $2 in very quickly. If you look back at the late 1970s, so many stocks rose at tremendous percentage levels. And really, we'll probably get to the point, if we have a true gold stock mania, where anything with just even the word gold in its name will go up 1,000%. So at that point, you might actually just want to buy even the worst possible stocks that are just 1 cent, because they might just go to $1 because they have gold in the name. So, but that's down the road. I think we're still a couple of years away from that. So right now, I mostly own producers. I own some majors, not too many. I own mostly producing juniors, or at least near-term producing. So if they're not producing now, they already have a full resource, and they're just looking at putting it into production.
Okay, so these are probably, or what's the average market cap? Sounds like maybe somewhere between $1 billion and $2 billion, or?
Oh no, I usually stay lower than the $1 billion mark with most of those those stocks. I'm talking about stocks, many of them, they've been so beaten down over the last year. Many are under $100 million.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on the duration that you're holding these stocks? So if you got a lot of stocks that are under 100 million, there's still going to be a fair amount of volatility there. Are you in and out of these positions, or are you just buying and holding, or?
I mostly just buy and hold, but I do trade sometimes, but it all depends. But I think with these things, it's really something you just have to, if you believe that this is going to happen, just buy it and hold it for now. Although we do actually offer a gold stock trading service. I met one of the best gold stock traders I've ever met in my life. His name's Vin Maru, and he now writes the TDV Golden Trader. So that's one of our newsletters on trading these stocks. But for the most part, I just don't, and part of it is I'm just too busy. I just don't have time to watch these things. I'm building a business, which is actually one of the best ways to get wealthy, is to actually build your own businesses, and that's really what I am. I'm more of an entrepreneur than an investor.
What about things like call options? Are you just buying shares outright, or are you doing any options, things like that?
I do some options. I just bought put options on Apple a few weeks ago, which has been nice. As soon as I saw that iPhone 5, I shorted some Apple. But no, generally I don't do too much. I have played them in the past. Of course, it takes a lot of, that's the next step up from stock trading is option trading. It's even more difficult, and you have to be even more smart and have a lot of experience to really do well in that market. So yeah, I'm just too busy and just don't have the interest. I think if these gold stocks do what I think they're going to do, they're going to go up thousands of percent. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not going to get too greedy.
In terms of, so it sounds like, and again, correct me if I'm misunderstanding here, it sounds like you're mainly buy and hold, and you're looking to exit at what you will regard, or what you'll try to identify as the top of the gold market, somewhere near that, obviously. What are your thoughts, or is that correct? And what are your thoughts on, a top? I know it's always hard to forecast, but there are some people saying, 10,000, 50,000. Are those unrealistic, or what do you think?
Well, I think 1 trillion is totally realistic. I think the U.S. dollar is going to zero. So that's what's going to make this the trickiest part, is when to get out. Because along with, it's not going to be, in my opinion, I could be totally wrong, but in my opinion, this isn't going to be like the 1980s where gold reaches a peak and then everything resets and everything's fine for another 20 years. I think the end of this gold bubble is the U.S. dollar doesn't exist anymore. So it's going to be very, very tricky. And that's what I was saying earlier, is my biggest problem with these junior stocks is when to get out, because not only do we have to time the top of the market, but we also have to get our money out and into hard assets before the whole system collapses. And in a few years, it's going to be very difficult to buy things like gold with Federal Reserve notes, because at that point, most people will see that it's going to zero. And so it's going to be very, very tricky. This is a very dangerous time for people with assets. Most people are going to get wiped out in what's going to happen, even people who own things like gold stocks, because if you don't sell them before the whole system collapses and no one will take anything for them, or even if you can sell them for 1 trillion Federal Reserve notes, and then you can't get gold, and then the 1 trillion Federal Reserve notes don't even buy you anything a few months later. This is very dangerous times. It's incredibly dangerous times. But it's not the end of the world or anything. Doug Casey, who is I consider him my mentor and a very good friend, he often says that when these sort of collapses happen, really not much wealth actually lost. It just changes hands. So it's just really a matter of trying to make sure you're on the side that's the receiver of those assets before the whole system collapses, rather than the one who loses them.
Okay, I think that's about it in terms of the questions that I had for you. But why don't you tell us about your company? Dollar Vigilante is really innovative. I really haven't seen anything else like it on the internet. So tell us about the variety of services that you guys offer.
Sure, thank you. Basically, if you just go to dollarvigilante.com, on our front page, there's an email place you can put your email. We send out free blogs every day talking about all this kind of stuff all the time. And so if you just want to get a taste for what we talk about, you can do that. We also have a paid newsletter, $150 a year if you just want basic information about how to survive this collapse, or it's $250 per year if you want additional information on these junior gold stocks. We have one of the top analysts in the world, Ed Bugos is our analyst, and he writes regularly, almost weekly, on the gold stocks. So that's $250 a year. We also offer passports at tdbpassports.com and all sorts of other things. But I think if you just subscribe to our blog or our newsletter, you'll really get a handle on what we're doing and all the things that we can provide people.
Okay, that's once again, that's dollarvigilante.com. You can follow Jeff Berwick there. Jeff, thanks a lot for taking time out of your day to join us for this interview.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.